So, welcome everyone. Welcome to Journey Through the Eyes, the EMDR podcast that is here to unveil and explore the transformative power of EMDR therapy. Our mission here at Journey Through the Eyes is to support both new and seasoned clinicians with those critical, powerful, and insightful conversations and resources about EMDR therapy and how to build your amazing private practice. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Tamera J. Brown, an EMDR consultant in training, and also the founder of Rise Psychotherapy and Coaching Services, where I get the honor and the privilege of offering online virtual telehealth to amazing individuals. I have with me several guests, but also my amazing co-host, Miss Kathy Couch. Kathy, introduce yourself.
Yeah, I am Kathy Couch, therapist with the last name Couch. So fun. And mom of twins, an all-star cheerleader, CEO, all the things. Wife, my husband likes me to say that too. So I'm out here in Twin Falls, Idaho. I own Rewired 360, which is a training and consulting company with a mission of transforming people's lives and healing them from the inside out with grief and trauma and EMDR. And then I provide couples and EMDR intensives at my practice at Willow Creek Health. So Tamera and I have partnered today to invite our guests. Today we're going to be talking about something that's not necessarily widely known, is the field of thanatology. So we've invited our guests who are also fellows in thanatology through the Association of Death Education and Counseling. We'll talk about the differences in those educational platforms and also the field of thanatology. One of Stephanie's favorite things is that if you think of Thanos from Marvel movies, thanatology means the study of death, dying, and bereavement. And so we like to kind of joke about how it is in modern day practice with thanatology. So we have Mel Srolovitz today, and we have Stephanie Pearce. And so I'd like you both to introduce yourself, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about get the thanatology details.
You want to go ahead, Stephanie?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you, Mel. Hi, I'm Stephanie Pearce. You'll see from my counterpart, Mel, she's in the city in Philly, and I'm in more of the country in Pennsylvania, in the Pocono, PA area, which is evolving to not be a country setting anymore. I have a private practice in the Poconos. I also live here. I specialize in grief and loss, reproductive and perinatal mental health. I'm also a certified EMDR therapist and consultant. And Mel and I were, before this podcast, we were talking about our love of learning then, and I recently got certified in dissociation studies for Institute of Creative Mindfulness. They just changed their name now to Creative Mindfulness Network, I believe. And then I'm also launching with Kathy and Tamera's help my Compassionate Presence Learning Hub, which is a continuing education division of my practice too. And I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. I'm Mel Srolovitz, pronouns are she, her. As Stephanie said, I'm in Philadelphia, and coming into this work in this space with you all as a board certified music therapist. I'm also a certified death doula through the International End of Life Doula Association, or INELDA, also a fellow in Thanatology through ADEC, as was already mentioned, and I am a new Doctor of Health Science student at Thomas Jefferson University, so keeping busy. I have been working in hospice care for just about 10 years, currently working at Penn Medicine Hospice over here in Philly. And I also am the owner of Holistic Caring Death Doula Services, LLC, based in Philly, Pennsylvania suburbs, southern New Jersey, those areas. And so also very excited to be here.
Yeah, we have had Mel here before talking about death doulas and the art of doula. And so if you're interested in that, refer to our previous podcast. We are happy to have you return and talk about the field of thanatology. I'll kind of share my story about how I became sort of interested in thanatology. If you guys would kind of share your journey of being certified through the Association of Death Education and Counseling, and then we'll kind of talk about the different credentials there. So my story is that I was working with a local organization it was at the time called Kids Count 2. And they changed their name to Because Kids Grieve. And so they're an organization that works with children ages 6 to 17 that have lost a primary parent or caregiver. And I was volunteering with them when I worked at child welfare. And I've been volunteering with them probably now for about 15 years. And one of the counselors that worked in that organization was certified. I just saw it on a brochure through the Association of Death Education and Counseling. And so I looked it up and I thought, oh, well, that fits. And I went and compared all my CEs and everything that I needed to be certified. And then we were talking about how difficult this exam was. So I was a certified thanatologist as the first step through there. And then this year, we could also transition to be fellows in thanatology, which Stephanie and I didn't have to take the test this time, but we submitted all of our expertise. And the difference is now that we're sort of educators in the field. And so that's kind of my journey. So now if you see the little FT after my name, that's a fellow in thanatology, which means we specialize in everything death, dying, and bereavement. So maybe we'll start with Mel this time. Mel, can you kind of describe for our listeners your journey and your interest in becoming thanatology and how you became certified?
Yeah, I feel like my journey in end of life care in general started when I was in high school. As a student, to get into honor societies, you have to be a volunteer. Didn't know what I wanted to do, and so just found a local nursing home and began to volunteer there. And it was specifically on a hospice unit. And so I was working directly with some of the residents just in providing support to them and sort of witnessing what their process is like at end of life, and really fell in love with it. And then I experienced some personal losses with death, and really wanting to go into hospice care in particular, in seeing some of the gaps in care that one of my family members had experienced, and how can I be someone to be an active voice for others and helping to change and collaborate with others and just learn more about their experience. And I really think this learning aspect is one of the most important pieces of the work that we do, and really collaborating with those that we have the privilege of working with, and to learn from them and how we can best support them, but how we can best support ourselves and learn together as well. In terms of going into the fellow in thanatology, I didn't do the certification. When I was looking at the application, saw that I had enough hours of education and publications and all of that to go into applying for the fellow. And then once I was accepted, studying for the exam was very hard. I was positive I failed it. Somehow I did not. So it's a great feeling, and so glad all of us on the call today are able to say that as well. To be FTs is very exciting. But really wanting to make sure that I'm providing care as best as possible through a whole person holistic identity. And so I love being a music therapist, but I'm just wanting to sort of propel my identity a little bit more and progress in that way, and find all the different skills and techniques and knowledge base out there to inform my work, so that I can be a better provider for others and to be in that space with others more effectively. So it's kind of how I got to this point.
Yeah, I learned about, actually, I worked at a hospice company. I think it had to have been in 2001. And so I heard the concept music thanatology. That's the first time I ever heard that. And they were practicing music thanatology with their hospice patients. And I thought, that is so cool. And so that's the first time I heard the word. And so I was able to go back, and so I was somewhat familiar with the term, but I too, kind of like you, was like, let me look at this credential and see what it would take. And so the test is very difficult. So if you look on our courses, you'll see maybe the 6 themes of grief. We've changed the name to foundational aspects of grief, but it's 6 clinical themes. So it's death. If you guys can help me out, death, dying. Let's see, death,
Death education,
death education, traumatic trauma, grief, loss, and mourning, assessment, intervention, and one other area. So those are 6 categories, and then you have 10 clinical indicators within those that you have to test on, which are things like social cultural aspects, legal interfaces, religious issues. And so we have to become acquainted with all those modern grief theories and all of those frameworks that have guided the practice of thanatology to where it is today. So that's kind of what the test consists of. So it's also understanding and kind of applying those theories so that we can kind of gain our expertise there. So then the fellow is more where you teach that knowledge and education, and like Mel said, publications. So that's kind of what it entails if you're interested in doing that. And I just felt like if I'm going to be providing grief care or end of life care, work in the death care industry, I should probably be certified there. So that's kind of for our listeners there. Stephanie, do you want to describe your experience here?
So I'm a social worker, and I started my career in a crisis unit, which people, I think some of my colleagues there would say, oh, we don't really do grief and loss counseling or therapy. And then you zoom out years later and you realize there was all these layers of grief. And that's what we were actually doing, was working with grief and loss, but not putting a name to it. And then I evolved over the years to specialize in women's issues and perinatal mental health, which there's, of course, infertility, many layers of grief there. I also kind of became interested in the concept, which David Kessler talks about the good death and what that really means and how you can apply that into personal and professional life. I was looking for a program too, where that would help elevate your grief and loss skills, and that's how I found ADAC. And I think, like both Kathy and Mel, I said I don't have the credentials to be able to get the or the certified thanatology distinction. And then I looked over my my work and I was in all the CEs, and I said, oh yes, I do. I have all of those things, and I just have to take a test though. For the field of thanatology, and this is the core text that I'm referencing is one of the texts for the ADAC exam. I like how it's, if you read the title, it's of core and Doka's text is it is the study of death, dying, and bereavement, but also life and living. So I like how that the field puts those together.
Yeah, so we're just going to kind of outline for our audience. Would you kind of discuss maybe your core principles, or I've kind of outlined a few of them, of thanatology, and kind of how it intersects with thanatology, or excuse me, other industries such as psychology or healthcare systems, music, right? Can you guys kind of describe some of those core principles of what being a thanatologist means?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in and start. I think there are the core principles like you had noted, but it's such a broad area of study depending on what level of support we're offering, where we're offering, what the needs are. So in general, when I think about core principles of thanatology, especially in my end-of-life work, I'm thinking about really the importance of understanding the dying process. And so this is not just physical, but it is emotional, social, psychological, spiritual, religious, all of that. As whole person understanding and whole person care helps us to understand what the process might be like for a certain individual and how important that is. Also understanding grief models and frameworks. I know there is the classic stages of grief model. However, there's been a lot of evolution in grief models, and a couple that I really appreciate are ideas of contingent bonds, as well as the dual process model, kind of oscillating between loss orientation and restoration orientation, and how can these ideas inform the support that we're providing for individuals, really important. Also, the exploration of diverse multicultural responses to death, dying, and bereavement. This might include death rituals, memorialization, grieving practices and responses, how they differ based on different cultures, different areas of the world, religious practices. All of that is really important for us to understand and to be aware of. And then also really emphasizing too, as Stephanie sort of mentioned with the idea of tying the life and living piece, is that the idea of thanatology also encompasses the understanding of non-death losses. This is something that's really important, especially with the advances of technology and social media. I feel like we're sort of experiencing loss and death vicariously every day. You know, we read the news, we read about other people's losses, even if we're not directly impacted by that, indirectly we're experiencing it. And so that's important to understand too. And one other thing that I will just note, sort of jumping into your other question, Kathy, with the intersection of some of the other disciplines of care that thanatologists sort of focus on, is really making sure that, especially in hospice, I talk about this all the time, about being a generalist versus a specialist, that as a thanatologist, we're not going to be specialists necessarily in what a nurse provides, medically and clinically, or what a chaplain can offer. So we understand the importance of referring out to those specialists, but it's important for us as thanatologists and whatever other identities you have within serious illness and end-of-life care, is that we have a general understanding of serious illness, psychological processes, experiences of anxiety, depression, withdrawing inward, life review processes. How can we support that within whatever our particular scope of practice is? Understanding common medications that a nurse or a doctor might prescribe, why those are helpful or why there are contraindications as we're engaging with patients in that discussion. And also really how spiritual frameworks will affect the processing and experience of one's dying process. And so again, we know to refer out to the chaplain for some of those deeper conversations, or the nurse, the social worker, whoever it might be, really making sure that we have a generalist understanding to provide the best in the moment care.
So good. That was so comprehensive. That was just such an intelligent response. I really appreciate all of those things that you covered. It was very, very thorough. Stephanie, what would you like to add to that from your experience?
Well, I think she hit it the ball out of the park, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna just echo what she said, that so thanatology, that field, I mean, it intersects and also informs other disciplines like psychology, medicine, the spiritual domain. It lends, like, so we look at the holistic and the whole picture then. So in medicine, yes, you're looking at the physical, but when you bring in the thanatology too, you're looking at spiritual, psychological, emotional implications then. So even if somebody who right, they're in treatment, they're in decided to move from treatment to hospice, then we're bringing in, okay, what emotional implications, what spiritual implications do we need to be mindful of? Bringing in death education then, and knowing like the myths of hospice, and clarifying what it is and isn't, and what can this could be actually something positive for someone to transition to death. Then we're also that spiritual domain. We're bringing, how can we bring that into medicine in a medical model? How can we bring that into hospice and the death and dying process then? And looking at more death education piece and bringing that in, how can death be looked at more as a transition than something that we view as negative and not like a taboo subject area?
I really appreciate this idea of the non-death losses and the idea of the good death. I think those are really important terms. And I also think, Tamera, I'm curious, kind of as you're thinking about these ideas and thanatology and kind of those experiences, what are your thoughts kind of on the field as we have shared?
Well, for me, it's really interesting because, I mean, as therapists, of course, whether we step into the field new or we've been here on the journey, we get to what I'd like to say, sacredly be with incredible human beings who are navigating this thing we call life, and uh, losing someone or something that you love is a part of that journey. As we, are becoming the therapist we desire to be, we find our path, or we find that healing work that we love and are passionate about. I have had the honor of serving a few clients who suffered big losses, from children to spouses. And I can say this, that at the time, bless God, first of all, for EMDR, because at the time I had very little knowledge and information about how to support a human being who was going through grief. And then also because I had very little knowledge, which is why I'm really excited about this conversation. Not only are we having this conversation for other therapists and other professionals, but for the listening audience who it's the inevitable, right? And knowing that there is therapy, there is a pathway, there are healers who specialize specifically in this. So this gives people options, right? But because I had such limited information, I really didn't want to serve. I didn't want, it was like difficult, and it was like, oh my God, I'm a mom. Like, girl, I don't want to, I don't, and then I love a part of this conversation too, and demystifying some things and kind of taking the spookiness and the eeriness out of it. And so for me, just, being a therapist on the journey, I'm more open to it now because, again, bless God for EMDR that gives us that opportunity for folks like myself who are not specifically in deeply trained like the three of you all are. It helps to take the journey and shields a bit, and guides the journey a bit to really honing in what the client needs, because of course, as we know, with EMDR will do its beautiful work with the clients because it's so client-centered. But just dealing with this part of grief and loss, and in the idea of death and bereavement, it's layered, right? It's layered. But I'm very glad, very thankful to be among you all who are, so that I have a source to come to, okay, journeying through clients like that. But that's just kind of where I'm at. I'm still very new. It's not something that I often do, or I don't necessarily take on a lot of clients because I don't have a whole lot of knowledge and experience in navigating those things. Yeah.
I think too, even with the pandemic, and I'm curious too, maybe how you guys see how the pandemic has changed the worldview of grief. Tamera says this all the time. It's therapists are on the front line. We're the first healers. And so I really think, and I'm grateful that the death care field has been more on the front lines with the pandemic. And I really appreciate, Mel, what you have said about staying within our scope of practice, because so many times, people have said, oh, you work in this field, you must be able to take this case or this situation. And so I really appreciate that. I'm curious to ask each of you, how do you feel that the pandemic has sort of influenced or shaped our death care field and industry?
Well, I think that's something that put the topic of death and dying in maybe a forced discussion, though, because the pandemic, we had things that were very like happening to us all and were very scary, and we were hearing about young people dying from COVID and people that were high risk, and then people who didn't have any risk factors. So also the pandemic brought up, like Mel was talking about, the living losses and the non-death losses of like loss of even going in your car and going to work every day, loss of like security and knowing all was well, or believing all was well in the world. So I think the pandemic, it brought death and dying and even, yeah, non-death losses in the forefront for us to unpack and discuss. And maybe, like Tamera said, you make it less spooky and less scary to talk about.
Yeah, I can jump off of that. I definitely agree. Even being a death doula, even today, most people have heard of a birth doula or a midwife. Death doula is still a little bit more unknown. However, I think post-pandemic, this term and this discipline has become a little bit more understood, or at least the term has been heard a little bit more, which is great. And I think that also in experiencing so much death or loss, whether it's death related or non-death related, I really think it has encouraged people to be less afraid to have some of these conversations, knowing that talking about death will not kill you, as you know, it's a famous quote. And in that, being encouraged and open to completing advanced care planning documents, knowing that if we prepare now, we can think about what we want at the end of our lives, and that helps us to live a better life, helps us to feel some less anxiety about the planning aspect and not waiting until the last moments. So I really think that having some of these deeper conversations and not being afraid to, and understanding the importance of it, to not only discuss it, but also document it through various advanced care planning documents, like I said, has become more popular from what I have seen and witnessed and heard. And that has been really important too. It's unfortunate that pandemic had to cause that, or at least encourage it. But that is just something that I've witnessed as a big change that is something I hope everybody continues to do, so that we can, live our lives to the fullest, knowing that we have some of that figured out.
Right. I really think that I have it's really important for me in my practice to have an estate planner, having an attorney that I refer patients to for those things, for estate planning and end of life, care, making sure that they have all their paperwork in place. And, there's things you can do on your own, but also understanding like the local hospital system and having that local perspective was helpful to me, because he understood some of the dynamics within my own community as well, than issues that we may face sort of where we're at. So that was helpful for me. I'm curious, what are some of the misconceptions and challenges that you've experienced either in the field or about thanatology, or kind of the myths sort of about fears and sort of the discussion of death and dying?
Well, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that involves thanatology is just the difference between palliative care and hospice, and the difficulty of having these discussions, because a lot of people understandably think that palliative care equals end of life care, or that to come onto hospice means that I am expected to progress and pass or die within a month. All of that is not true. So that is something that I grapple with and have conversations with. I've especially been having these conversations with my family, and people who, grandparents who have been declining, and trying to encourage some increased support for them, and understanding that palliative care is serious illness care. It is support that can be offered at the time of a serious illness diagnosis, and just to have increased symptom and pain management and psychosocial support. Hospice, yes, being support for the end of life, but to have the most benefits, if we can dispel some of these misconceptions, I think a lot of patients and families would benefit much more with the entire team's approach to care. So Stephanie, I'll let you sort of take the rest of that, but that's just one of the biggest misconceptions in this framework of thanatology that I've experienced.
And I'm going to echo what Mel said about, right, the misconceptions that we get about hospice, to about even that it's like a place that, which for some people it could be that they do get it's in a more medical setting, but even not knowing that that's a possibility, it could be in your home. And then just because somebody signs and says they're consenting to be in hospice, right, then that it doesn't mean you die the next day then either, which I feel like is some of the time a misconception of a family member, or oh, that just because they are in hospice that means that they still don't want to pursue relationships or having fun in life then. So I think the field of thanatology gives what hospice really means and death and dying really means as an individual process. I think the term thanatology, and I know, like Kathy said, for me, it was a tongue twister, is misunderstood and is seen as negative, where thanatology, we're also, I mean, it could be adaptive, where we're helping families look at, okay, we know that yes, your family member has a terminal diagnosis, but how do you want to spend the time with them in the time that they do have then? If somebody is, we're acknowledging anticipatory grief, and we're also, if somebody, when they die, to introducing or even talking beforehand about the concept of continuing bonds and how do we continue a relationship once somebody is no longer physically present. So it can be thanatology. It can be more of an adaptive term than a negative term.
These are really great conversations. I'm curious, for you ladies, what I would like to know is, could you describe sort of this idea of this adaptive death, this good death, or being a death doula, trying to transform the model of death being scary, and how do you work with people to create sort of an adaptive death?
I think it's too, oh, I'm sorry, Mel.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
And you have the doula perspective that, like, a good death is if somebody, okay, what are your wishes? Identifying who do you want to help you carry them out then? Who, like Kathy, you talk about, like, who's your decision makers if you are not able to make decisions for yourself? Would you prefer to die at home? Would you prefer that there's music around? Who do you want to be around you? So it's like almost like how Mel was talking about that birth plan or birth wishes we do on the other continuum for when somebody is going to give birth, and we can bring that into death. Like, what are your wishes? What are your what is it, like, your hopes? Like, again, who do you want to be there? Who do you want to support you? Can we bring in creative things like music, art, pet therapy, aromatherapy? And we can be creative too in talking about end of life care, and talking about, again, wishes and hopes, and make it more adaptive in that way, and talking about pain management as well.
This is really very powerful and very enlightening, and also in encouraging, because what I'm listening to is that with something that's so inevitable, right? Um, it 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 this provides the client with some empowerment and really gives them that felt sense of autonomy, that even though you're facing something that is inevitable, you still get to choose how you're going to navigate, or how you're going to be with that experience. I think that's so powerful, to be able to design how you're going to process your transition. And then I'm listening to you all. I did not think about really being with a person from that client-centered framework of saying, what are your desires? What are your, how do you want to bless your journey through this, in adding music? And then I think you all touched on something that I think is powerful, because I know for the folks in my community, there's always this rift going on with folks who don't want certain people present, right? And and families who argue, or just all these things that come up. How do you all serve with that aspect of when you sit with a client and then they begin to tell you who they don't want or what they don't want in their process that could impact, the people that they're in relationship with. How do you all navigate that?
I'm going to pop in here real quick and kind of go back to Mel's comment about advanced care planning, because sometimes, a lot of family conflicts and death are surrounding the will, the trust, the wishes, the dying, who's left to manage the estate. And so, sometimes it's a surprise, like, oh, I didn't know that you left the estate to so-and-so, or I just had a patient yesterday, the whole family, the wife wasn't left the estate, it went to the brother. And so that caused a whole family rift and a whole issue at a crab cookout, And so it's these things, I think these really deep rooted long-term feelings can result from these decisions, but really kind of going back to what you're saying is being really clear with them on what is the decision that this person wanted, regardless of the family. And, encouraging, people, if they do have a loved one and there's no marriage there, if they have a loved one, they can't get in to provide those decisions to their loved one, even if they're not married. And so I think that's an important point that you're educating people on and giving them that right to decide. They don't have to choose that, but they understand, and informing them and that right to consent. Ladies, what do you feel about this? It's a loaded question here.
I mean, I can jump in and just share that I feel like this is the essence of death doula work.
Yeah.
Is that death doulas are advocates for patients and families, but especially for the patient when we have these difficult discussions of, I really want this person, please do not let this person in. Maybe exploring with the patient or the client, if this person shows up, what would you like me to say? What would you like me to do? So that they are continuing to have that autonomy, as Tamera said, in using their voice to say, well, you can tell them this, or maybe you can work on them with this after I have died, and some bereavement work. But I also think that's, again, going sort of off of what Tamera offered just previously, this idea of joint decision making is so important. And as patients are experiencing the loss of bodily functions, of not being able to work, to drive, to go play baseball, that they still have meaning and power in their lives. And so any way that we can encourage that autonomy, that joint decision making, is of the utmost importance. And this also gets to this idea of a good death. Yes, I believe that a good death is a collective sense, depending on cultural, religious backgrounds, things like that. But it's also extremely subjective and individualized. And exploring that early on, having these proactive conversations to understand what is a good death for you. I know that I hope to die at home. I hope to have a cat on my bed next to an open window. I hope for, my favorite music to be playing, my loved ones to be present. I guess I should think about who exactly I want, but in general, but it might be the complete opposite for someone I'm working with, and that is valid. And important for me to know, because if I don't know, then I'm going to base off of what I think they would want or what I want and projecting that onto them, which is not right. So having some of these proactive conversations to really understand what is important to you and using your voice and autonomy is really important.
Stephanie, I do want to hear from you really quick. I just want to have one question for Mel. Mel, typically, when do people kind of say, hey, I need a death doula? How do they when is that part for you, where people typically call you? And then I want to hear from Stephanie on her thoughts.
So really quickly, I can share that I don't have an answer. That's always very different. I have had a lot of people reach out who are not ready for death doulas, or they think they're not ready. And so we have this conversation of really being proactive and the importance of building a relationship and trust and connection before you're no longer able to engage actively in that process. But I have a lot of people who are reach out just saying, I heard about this. I'm starting to think about it. I just lost my mom. Can you just tell me what a death doula does? What do you do specifically so that I can just have you in my phone book, when the time is ready? I have others who realize that their loved one is at the very end of life and the family is trying their best to support them, but they're exhausted and they just want someone present so that they can sleep, but also knowing that that person who is present has training in understanding what the dying process looks like. So if they, the doula, for instance, feels like their loved one is taking their final breath, so they can run upstairs and wake them up so they come down and they can be with them when they die. So it's a pretty big continuum of people I just want to know what you do so I know in 50 years, and other people where it's more urgent, can you get out here today? So, yeah.
Wow. Ladies, this is really powerful and so, again, so enlightening. Um, when we talk about just therapy, and what I hope that whether it's the therapist or just the everyday human being who comes across this conversation, that they get some of these beautiful glimpses of opportunities and know today that there is a path or several paths that they can journey through to help them to navigate loss through compassionate care. And it kind of just really speaks volumes and helps us pretty much to understand that loss can manifest in so many different forms, whether it's the death of a loved one, the ending of a relationship. I would love to hear you all talk about that as well, or the loss of your health, just as Mel was kind of speaking about how when people are on that path or they're getting ready to transition like that, they're losing. I mean, it speaks so many volumes, so it's so multi-layered. They're losing bodily functions and all of these things. And my hope for us as a human collective is that you all will continue to have these conversations, because in my experience, I have clients right now whose family, they're dealing with loss, and they don't know how to honor and respect and be compassionate, considerate to what folks are experiencing. And I think one of the greatest things that we as therapists, who I call the healers of our time, the greatest thing that we can do for human beings is to give them knowledge and information so their eyes can be enlightened so that they can wield the sword of choice in a beautiful and empowering way if they dare to do so. Beautiful, beautiful conversation and discussion on such a vulnerable topic. Yeah.
Question I have for you, Stephanie, here is if you can describe for us, where do you see thanatology going, or breakthroughs or innovations in the future? Do you have any ideas that you can think about in the future? Maybe
That's a big Friday question. No, I'm gonna. So there's too. I think it's the field is too evolving to be more like a recognized field, and I think what we're talking about here less of a taboo subject. As far as like then day-to-day practical life implications, I think in Evermore is where they do advocacy, death-related advocacy and bereavement is even having some change with in bereavement policies. And I think the field of thanatology can advocate that a week maybe of paid time off for the death of your mother is not adequate then, or even for if somebody's experiencing like loss related to a miscarriage, that there should be a policy in your work that you get time off for that or time off for IVFs. I think the field of thanatology is going to continue to do some advocacy related to even workplace policies, and then how like how much time off for work we get, but also that death, dying, bereavement is something that we do talk about, and we do have more language, and it's a less taboo subject area.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I'm curious too, what resources, books, organizations can you recommend to our listeners today if they're wanting to learn more? I know I recommend any of David Kessler's work. There's Paul Denniston who does grief yoga. He's amazing too. There's also What's Your Grief with Litza and Eleanor Haley. We've had them out here in Idaho. And then there's a book on grief and grieving, Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Heart. There's just a lot of resources. What are your kind of resources for the listeners?
Um, those were all great. I can just add to that if we're thinking about end of life planning, advanced care planning. The website that I have used personally is joincake.com. It has lots of great resources, very easy to navigate the website and to create some of your forms. Conversation Project is a great organization website with a lot of resources. I had to write out some of them because I always forget. In terms of books, we see this a lot in the hospice world, but any of Barbara Carnes' books, such as we call it, the Little Blue Book, gone from my site, but she has a lot in her series. They are short, very detailed, but easy to read and absorb and comprehend, which is extremely important in working with people in general, depending on literacy level and understanding health literacy. How can we offer this death education and understanding in a way that is easy to understand, especially when we're so overwhelmed by everything else going on with our loved one, with ourselves. So any of her books for sure. There is Caregiver Action Network if folks are interested in thanatology and support in general, where to sort of direct people to go when they need that extra level of support. Family Caregiver Alliance is a great one. You mentioned What's Your Grief, Kathy. So those are a few that I would like to include that are really important.
Stephanie, do you have any on your realm?
I'm a big David Kessler fan, so of course David Kessler's work, but also the Association of Death Education and Counseling. They have their own handbook, which is one of the test texts, but it is for anybody who wants to learn more about grief terms or the foundational theories or the more contemporary theories. It's a great resource. And then you can find on Amazon that textbook, which is also part of the exam through ADAC, but that Death, Dying, and Life and Living text by Core, and Doka gives you a nice foundational level too. Anybody who's looking to do more advocacy, death, dying, and bereavement, definitely check out Evermore and what they're doing for advocacy and trying to change policy as well.
Well, we also want to thank you, ladies, and Stephanie and I. Mel, you may be a part of this. You don't know yet, but we're putting together a grief summit this fall, and so that's going to be where we can take all of our sort of resources together. So that should be coming up. We're still in the very early planning stages, but I think it would be for our listeners. Just stay tuned for that. We certainly appreciate you all, and I wanted to just thank you for your time and dedication to the work and healing of our communities, reminding you to take care of yourselves in this very difficult field, and just honor and respect you so much. So thank you for all the work that you do on a daily basis. So I'll turn it over to Tamera to kind of any following questions or how you take us out.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much for being here. Such a beautiful conversation. Just want to see if one of you will share just something to encourage our listening audience who may be navigating something like this right now, and just kind of holding space for that as we surrender ourselves to our Friday.
I would just offer that there is no right or wrong way to grieve, to prepare for a death, whether it's your own death or the death of a loved one or a friend, anyone who you are connected to. I think that the newer grief models really emphasize and encourage this. And not that we have to get into all the theories and models, but just in general, that whatever you're doing, if that works for you, then that's right for you. So always wanting to encourage the individuality of death, loss, and grief.
One following question: where can we find you all at?
Good question. You take it away, Mel.
In terms of like my website,
contact information,
yeah. So website is holisticcaringdeathdoula.com. The business is Holistic Caring Death Doula Services LLC. If you look it up that way, or you can send me an email. It is you can just use my Gmail if you want. So in case you see my last name there, it is srolovitzm@gmail.com. Or if you find the website, it will link to my my business email as well.
Yeah.
No, www.stephaniepearcetherapy.com. You can also, there's an information form there that goes right to me if anybody has a question. And then my learning hub will hopefully, the site will be live by Tuesday of next week, is www.compassionatepresencelearninghub.com, which is a mouthful.
We love it. Well, we thank you all. Everyone, please take time. Continue to be with us with Rewired 360. Follow the book club and all these amazing things and the healers who are holding space for incredible human beings. Till next Friday, stay blessed, stay warm, stay safe, and we'll see you all soon. Take care.
You're done recording? Okay.
There. I got to go, ladies.
Okay.
Bye,
Okay.
Tamera.
Bye.
Yeah.
See you
You're
all.
going to send us your links. Would you email me those links that you mentioned, Mel and Steph? You send those so I can put them.
Yeah, so I actually right before this, I sent you some of the resources that I may have mentioned, and I think before I sent you my websites.
Okay.
Really? I think if you don't get it, then let me know.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. You all, I appreciate you. I honor you. I respect you. I send so much love and light. So thank you all so much for everything you do. I'm just so happy with my peeps.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Okay.
Good
Thank
seeing
you
you,
both.
Mel.
Bye, guys.
You as
Bye,
well.
Kathy.
Bye.